Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Senator Isaacson, to you both for holding this hearing at a watershed moment in the history of the Congo. As you know, Crisis Group is an independent, nonpartisan, non-governmental organization, and our mission is to seek to prevent and to help resolve deadly conflict. I don't think there's any question that this second election since the end of a brutal civil war, which produced some 5 million victims, had seemed to be a moment for the Congo to move forward on a democratic journey. Instead, we meet at a time of desperation, enormous frustration, and some great degree of fear. There are estimates now that total several million voters who courageously went to vote, cast their ballots, and then those votes were not counted, or the results were never even transmitted to the central tabulation centers. And in some cases, it now appears that some of the original tally sheets and the ballots may not have been preserved, and so the issue of auditing is going to be very difficult. I should add that the reports that we've received, which echo the findings of the Carter Center, the European Union, and more than 30,000 Congolese that the Catholic Church deployed as observers, is, as the Carter Center stated, that these results, the preliminary results issued by the CNE, lack credibility. And let me just emphasize at the outset, and I'll go into some detail. While I also have the highest regard for Secretary Carson, we don't believe this is a technical issue. This is a political issue. There are technical problems, but it's a fundamental political issue.
Mr. Schneider, please stop. Let me be clear. We're not going to allow demonstrations, comments, or conversations during this hearing. I will have people removed. Please allow us to conduct the hearing in some peace and order. Thank you. Mr. Schneider.
You made the point about the question about the implications of the absence of functioning authority in different places in the country. And I think it's important to recognize that the initial reports that we have indicate, as Secretary Carson mentioned, that among the worst situations were in Kinshasa, where the Carter Center found some 2,000 polling stations in Kinshasa where the results simply were not counted in the final tally sheets, and another 1,000 around the country. They estimate 850,000 votes were affected. The EU yesterday, in its detailed report that came out, now estimates 1.6 million votes that were not counted. And I think the fundamental issue here is about the disenfranchisement of Congolese voters. This was their right. This is a right that clearly seems to have been denied to a substantial degree. I should also add that we've now heard, and there's a report again in the EU report, that there were some polling stations where there were more votes tabulated than voters registered. Where close to 100% of the votes from those stations reported by CNE were for President Joseph Kabila. Yet in some of those very instances, observers were able to be there through the end of the tallying, and in fact, they found very different results. In some cases, the results were more balanced. In other cases, the second place finisher, Etienne Tshisekedi, actually came in first. And in a sense, these results show that our worst nightmare in the pre-electoral period have come to pass. That is, the results are so marred by widespread charges of fraud and dishonesty that the credibility of the entire election may be fatally impaired, and so too the legitimacy of the government that follows. But our major concern right now is that we are deeply disturbed by the loss of life that's already occurred and, unfortunately, the potential for ever-widening regional and ethnic conflict and upheaval. And that's where we argue that there has to be the central focus right now. We believe there's an overriding responsibility of the international community, from the MONUSCO peacekeeping mission, the United States and others, particularly the African leadership and the African Union, to join with the Catholic Church and others to find a path away from a return to national violence in the Congo. That's really where we see the gravest danger. And I should add that while the international community now has indicated that it believes these results were fatally flawed, there must be a mechanism proposed beyond the question of technical experts in order to participate in the verification of these initial results and to provide some degree of mediation in the Congo. And we believe that that's crucial. The African Union, the United Nations, the European Union, and the U.S. should immediately be focused on what is the mechanism that can help lead the Congo in a different direction. And I should add that ultimately, the goal should be to permit that those voters who were not able to vote or whose votes were not counted to re-vote in those areas in order to ensure that their right is recognized. And that ultimately is the only way that you will ever really know who won this election. And essentially what we're asking is that this be done at a time when the country is sort of poised on whether or not there's going to be additional conflict or whether it's going to move forward in democratic fashion. And remember that we have not yet had even the preliminary results with respect to legislative voting. And again, that verification, which will need to be some participation of an independent international body, along with the Congolese, because of the immense amount of suspicion that has occurred. And just let me give you 4 examples. In the preliminary issues, 1, the constitutional amendment that changed the playing field. 2 was that the voter registration rolls were challenged. The political parties, opposition parties, never had a chance to audit them. 3 was the nature of the membership of the CENI, with a clear bias towards the current government. And 4th was the naming in early November of a Supreme Court, which is ultimately going to preside over the dispute resolution, again, with a heavy partisan cast to it. These are essential questions. And I'll stop by simply noting that there are 2 other issues that have been raised, and I think they're crucial in terms of the future of the Congo. One is security sector reform, and reform particularly within the army. And the second is the non-corrupt management of the country's natural resources. And I should add that we agree with Secretary Carson on the need for the action that was taken with respect to the LRA, but there's far more that needs to be done with respect to the nature of the integration of militias into the armed forces of the Congo that must be changed if you're going to have an end to the kind of violations that we've seen in the past. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.